If you are not clear about what you stand for, whether or not it's your strengths or your purpose or your goals or whatever, how you are different and special versus your competitors, if you're not clear about that, then anything else is less efficient and less effective.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Bradley Hartman, and on this podcast, we connect with construction industry leaders from across the country and occasionally some experts from across the pond to share their insights on leadership, as you might assume, personal improvement, and to share practical, tactical tips to help you build trust and lead more persuasively. And while we generally have construction insiders on the show, having conversations about insights and leadership and things like that, occasionally we come across leaders from outside who have such a unique perspective beyond our industry that all but screams to be heard so we can hear from somebody else. And that's what we have here today. Our guest on today's show is Miss Rita Clifton. She's a marketing and branding expert, and she's joining us from the United Kingdom. And she is, quite certainly, the first CBE to come on the podcast. Now, I feel like when I'm on LinkedIn these days, everyone has all these random acronyms at the end of their names. And I said, you know what? I'm pretty sure that means nothing. In this case, it's a little bit different because CBE stands for Commander of the British Empire. And to be certain, this is the first CBE, Commander of the British Empire, we've ever had on this podcast. So who is Rita Clifton? She was the Vice Chair and Strategy Director at global branding firm Saatchi and Saatchi. She was also the CEO and Chair of Interbrand, and she co-founded BrandCap. And we're having her on to talk about leadership, not only for your business, but also for you. And she has a new book out that I think is extremely timely that is called Love Your Imposter. Be Your Best Self, Flaws and All. Because I know dealing with our clients and our friends in the industry and myself is from time to time, we have a twofold problem. Number one is that we feel that we are an imposter, that sooner or later we're gonna be found out. And at times that can be really motivating and help us to excel in our field, but also that can be extremely detrimental if we're not careful with it. And oftentimes we all have these, but we don't really talk about it. So Rita is going to walk us through on how to make sure we are right between the ears and we're confident in the way we're moving forward, leading our teams and leading ourselves. So in this episode, we talk about branding for your company and for yourself. We also talk about the importance of communicating three things: clarity, coherence, and leadership, obviously, in all that you do. So you're going to walk away from this relationship with Rita Clifton understanding how your brand can become a distinct competitive advantage. You're going to walk away with the ability to take a more critical view of the brand message that your company sends out. And we're going to learn how to embrace this idea of the imposter syndrome. So without further ado, enjoy my conversation with Miss Rita Clifton. So Miss Rita Clifton, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Very glad to be here too.
The designation CBE turns out to be a very big deal. Do you mind sharing for our audience, who I would venture to say, and maybe there's a lot more cultured listeners than I am, but maybe would you explain what that is and what you did to receive that?
Oh, goodness me. So a CBE, can you believe, stands for Commander of the British Empire. So I know this sounds just so strange, but it's just one step down from being a Dane. I think that's the best way of describing it. And obviously, the whole terminology about empire and things like that is just become an anachronism. But all I would say is it's a recognition of you having created something or achieved something that actually has done some good in the world. So I must say, the reason why I found it so gratifying was that some people, a range of people, have to write in and say why you deserve to be recognised by the British sort of institutions. And a lot of very busy and high-profile people actually bother to write in and tell, the office that decides these things that they felt that I deserved to have some sort of recognition. But, the thing that mattered most to me personally was that my mother, who just died a couple of years ago, my mother was actually there at the ceremony where I was awarded the medal as a commander of the British Empire, and she sat not 10 steps from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, and it was the moment of her life. So frankly, it's lovely to have some recognition that you've contributed something or done something, etc. But the thing that made it so special was actually the family impact, both of my mother, my daughters, and also my husband. So it is quite nice, isn't it, when people go, this person has done something good. Hey.
Well, that's amazing. And I can only imagine what a special gift that is to give to your parents and the people that have been around for you, who've seen your effort and your sacrifices and everything else. And
Indeed.
This may or may not surprise you, but you are the first commander of the British Empire to grace this podcast.
But, there is no empire left to command, and that's a good thing. Maybe I can find something to command. But anyway, these things move on, I know, but nevertheless, the recognition is still there. So
wonderful.
Great stuff.
Well, I appreciate you elaborating. That's wonderful. Well, I think something that you can help us commandeer us in the right direction is, I often feel, especially in the construction industry here, we find that terms like marketing and very similarly, words like strategy, they get thrown around a lot and they seem somewhat ambiguous. Now, as someone who's been a strategy director at marketing agencies and have a unique expertise in marketing, what questions might you ask when meeting a prospective client to understand why they might be asking for help and how you might be able to help them in terms of marketing and strategy?
Well, I think what's really interesting here is that any organisation of any kind, in any sector, at any stage, etc., if you are not clear about what you stand for, whether or not it's your strengths or your purpose or your goals or whatever, how you are different and special versus your competitors, if you're not clear about that, then anything else is less efficient and less effective. So that's the first thing I'd say. And in some ways, I don't mind if someone calls that brand positioning or brand strategy or purpose or positioning or whatever, but that's the really important thing to focus on. How clear are you about what you stand for? And then you need to think about how coherently and clearly that shows up through everything you do. So if you are saying you're an amazing customer service organization, for goodness sake, answer the phone, answer your emails, wrap yourself around your clients or your customers. The amount of times I've worked with organizations who say, we're really, really, for the customer, amazing customer service. And then, of course, you ring and no one comes back to you. So you need to be coherent about what it is that you do. And thirdly, you need to show leadership. And that means, obviously, who runs the organization, how they epitomize all the best values of that organization. But it also means about restlessness, about innovation, about setting the agenda, moving forward and everything else. You've got to keep yourself fresh and moving forward all the time. And when people say to me, well, that brand stuff, we haven't got a big marketing department or a big advertising budget. What I say is you're missing something here. To make the brand work properly, it's about touching everything you do to make sure you giving yourself a really distinct competitive advantage, from the way you answer the phone to the way you serve people, the way you follow up, the way you measure people, because the brand is the thing that lives on. After people have left or died, after buildings have fallen down or products and services become obsolete, the thing that lives on and generates some sustainable value and sustainable influence is your brand, your company brand. Frankly, sometimes it might even be a brand that you've created yourself. Mm-hmm. If you want something to pass on to colleagues, family, or anything else, that's your brand. However big a company or smaller company or whatever sector you're in. So, these are very valuable things, by the way, and they're the things that are going to outlast you and carry on generating value over time.
No, that's really well said. I feel when I saw that and when I read that in the book, I had that marked down as a question for you, that personal branding, managing your image, that clarity, coherence, and leadership clarity and leadership to me kind of jumped out as, I don't want to say intuitive, but I was able to wrap my head around them relatively quickly and stay with you in the book. Can you go into coherence just a little bit more? Rita, would it be fair to say that coherence is really about the specific behaviors and the standards of behavior within the organization that reflect the values?
Totally is, because actually, from an organizational point of view, and particularly the digital age, it's no use saying we're a smiley customer service organization, we're lovely on the outside, if frankly you're an axe murdering culture on the inside. The thing in the digital age is that it gets out with a scale and a speed that will take your breath away.
Yeah.
So you've got to be as good on the inside as you are on the outside. In a digital age, everything is visible, so everything counts. So that means that you and everyone in your organization needs to be clear about what it is you stand for, what you're doing, how they can help you. They need to be motivated. And frankly, if your staff are telling other people outside the organization, this is a really good company, that's very good marketing. What's also very good marketing and cheap marketing is if you delight a client or a customer and they think you're great, they'll tell other people. And you can actually ask them to tell other people too. And that grows the business. And that's what I characterize as fan versus funnel type marketing. What I mean by that is the old funnel marketing is that you had to spend a lot of money on advertising and profile building, and then people would try you.
Right.
If they liked you, they might try you again. Fan-based is if you are a great business where people love you inside and outside, they will tell other people. It's almost like a mechanical fan that then goes and amplifies that. That's cheap marketing. You don't need a great big fat marketing department or advertising budget to do that. That's branding the digital age. You know, the killer insight here is you've got to be a damn good business in the first place.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, just the fan versus the funnel, because I feel like the funnel, the idea of the funnel in sales has been out there forever. And now through some business automation and marketing automation, like the funnel's coming back and everyone's, what's your funnel? And it's much easier when that idea of Kevin Kelly, 1,000 true fans.
Yeah.
If you have fans who are willing to buy everything and tell everyone, that's very simple. And you know what that looks like and what that sounds like.
Absolutely. And then, of course, good marketing amplifies that. And the great thing about social media now and the ability to target and really understand people's behavior, that really makes your budget go further. So you've got to start really with these fundamental principles. And of course, these principles do apply to ourselves as individuals, because we can build our personal brands in whichever field. And I don't mean the Kardashianization about personal branding.
Sure.
I mean, you know, that's pretty successful. I mean, using that kind of brand thinking applied to yourself as a leader or an entrepreneur or whatever, because some of these principles can be incredibly effective to make sure you are as influential and as valuable for the long term as you can be.
Well, I love that. And that's a beautiful segue, if you will. Well, here you can see from the book, I've kind of highlighted the heck out of it.
Wow.
I wanted to read this one paragraph that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. And I read it several times. And maybe you can kind of elaborate, which is, I think, exactly what you're talking about. You say the real thing about branding, the way I look at branding is as an organizing idea for businesses and institutions as well as people. It's about how you do everything in a way that's distinctive and adds long-term value beyond day-to-day processes and cost. This can apply to human beings as well as organizations. We all want to be valued and influential as we can be, and for as long as we can. Now, when I read this, of course, so much of that resonated with me. And yet I see some people who've taken specifically to social media to, I feel, the nth degree, which is all about me. Look at me, you know, you Inc., that idea of I am a brand and kind of the Jay-Z sense of the phrase. What advice might you have for people to really accentuate what they do that's better and different, but not do it in a way that feels inauthentic and cheap or overdone?
You know, I think this starts with substance. I mean, what's interesting about the concept of branding, and I often use an iceberg to illustrate this, is that it's so easy for people to get obsessed with the top bit, the bit that shows, you know, the name and the logo and the advertising and the packaging and everything else. And similarly for human beings, it's easy to get obsessed with how you look, what your latest fad is, whatever. Whereas actually, the substance that lies beneath has always been the key to long-term successful brands. So what I'd say to that is it's often about your skills, your expertise, the content that you can produce. That's the substance, and who you are and your authenticity. And that's the thing, obviously, you need to do justice to. So when I think about personal branding, I'm thinking about, again, the clarity, who you are, what do you stand for, how are you different, and what your goals are. And then to think about how do you make those show up through the skills that you have, the expertise. So don't, for example, say, I want to run a business if you don't understand the language of finance. Yeah. Don't say you want to start a company if you don't understand how, again, the commercial world works. You've got to make sure that if you want to end up in the boardroom, that you present yourself in a way that does justice to that. And when people say to me, oh, for goodness sake, it shouldn't matter what you look like, it shouldn't matter what you wear, or it shouldn't matter how you present yourself. Well, I go, if you're advising a customer or a client who had a great product, you wouldn't say, oh, just shove it in a shabby old box, or any kind of inappropriate box and stick it on a shelf. You need to think about how who you want to be and your goals is supported by how you present yourself, how you communicate, again, the skills that you're constantly developing and innovating. And that's how you make the whole coherent picture work. It's the substance as well as how the visual parts, the clues, give people the right impressions of you. So the whole thing just works together, as you say, as an organizing idea. And that's the thing that really does work over the long term.
Well, it sounds like, too, this idea coming back to this clarity, coherence, and leadership can almost be viewed as a checklist to, is it clear? Is it coherent in the way you act? And I had a call with the vice president of sales who's speaking to a younger sales rep we were coaching, and he's been successful, hard worker, extremely likable, and he's driving a vehicle that shows maybe where he was maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago and not where he is now or where he's going. And I was giving some good-natured ribbing, and then the vice president came over the top with dude, you have to get a new vehicle. Do you have any advice in terms of coaching and maybe some critiques that maybe help build that relationship instead of tear it down for any leaders that might be thinking about, okay, I need to talk to this person about this?
Of course. Well, almost as a contrast to the story that you've given, and clearly, if you are running a luxury goods business, if you are running a craft skill type business, you want to make sure that you're using things, for example, beautiful notebooks. You need to make sure that you're giving off the right vibes and clues that you care about the sector and the craft skills attached to that. The other end of the spectrum, if you just think about the founder of IKEA, for example, because of course IKEA epitomized the brilliant value-based design, democratizing design. So of course the founder of IKEA was trying to make sure he took every cost out of the process that wasn't necessary. And what he did was actually, he drove an old Volvo. He always traveled economy because he epitomized that saving money, don't waste money at any stage of the process. So he was living the brand and epitomizing the brand, I think, in a way that was truly admirable. I mean, I'm a Brit, and Margaret Thatcher, whom you might remember, she's got some mixed views, mixed perceptions, both in the UK and around the world, about what she did. But nevertheless, as a personal brand example, fantastically strong. So she wanted to be a strong leader. And when she first started in politics, she had a slightly high voice. She didn't dress in a way that gave off this sort of power vibe. But if you noticed, Margaret Thatcher towards the end of her career versus the beginning, her hair was strong, her voice was strong. She took her voice down a few octaves because she wanted to kind of really drive that home. She wore strong tailoring, big shoulders, strong handbag, strong policies. You have to decide who you are and what you want, and then make everything really work to that. Because again, every little helps. Every little helps in making you feel confident and also as though you are someone who is really going somewhere.
Yeah. You wrote something here. I'm going to read it to you just about kind of this idea of consumer psychology. You said you just have to bear in mind that what comes out of people's mouths does not necessarily represent what's going on in their heads and their hearts. As we think about that, I think any of us who've been in business long enough or have worked with other human beings long enough know that's true. Do you have any advice on how we can become better at understanding how we can best serve people when knowing maybe what they say us to our face or what they write online or put in a customer satisfaction survey might not be the true reflection about how they feel?
Absolutely. And I think that we have got more ability to understand what people are really doing as opposed to what they say they might do. So, for example, it's a classic research survey syndrome where people will say, oh, it's awful, losing our little local shops. It's terrible. I like to go to my little local shops. And yet, actually, in reality, they're going down the road to take advantage of the low prices and great range at the great big chain stores. And sometimes people say they're going to vote this way, but actually in reality they're going to vote another way because they don't want to be seen to be voting for something that might feel a little bit, I don't know, antisocial or selfish, whatever it is. I mean, we see this both in consumer behavior and also we see it in more public behavior as well. What I would say is it's great to look at what people say. You can do Twitter scrapes, you can look at social media commentary and things of that kind. You do a lot of great scientific analysis about what the themes and words and so on coming out. But of course, that's no substitute for looking at what people are really doing. What are they really buying? Where are they really showing their preference? And now we have so much data that can put those things together and really give us a rich understanding about what people really want, i.e., the real drivers, the sort of statistically correlated drivers that tell you what it is that people are going to do, as opposed to things that might come out of people's mouths where they feel they should be saying something as opposed to what they really do believe and how they're going to behave. So I learned that very early on in my career. I used to run a lot of focus groups, and yet I also used to look at quantitative data. And I did a lot of work in the green economy and in sustainability and things like that. And of course, in research surveys, people would always say, oh yes, I want to buy green brands or environmentally sustainable brands and so on. But often at that time, it was at a premium. So of course, the reality was that, whereas 60% of people might say that they wanted to buy brands like this, only 10% of till receipts would suggest that they would do so.
Right.
But I think we're seeing a real change now. I mean, the evidence of planetary stress and all the things that we need to address, that is changing. But we can look at the data and go, what are people really doing? Let's really understand who they are and what they're doing, as well as what they say. Because frankly, that gives you your real agenda as well as your stated agenda, your overt agenda, and you need to try and put that thing together. That's actually good, empathetic human marketing.
That's great. We talked a couple times, it came up about this idea of finance, and you wrote kind of comparing it to a foreign language and talked about it is the language of the boardroom. And I thought it was a great line when you talked about, for some folks, if you started late, just like a language, you might have a bit of a strange accent when it comes to that. We work with a lot of folks in all parts of the construction industry, but specifically on sales. And we often talk about, you need to, again, how are you better? How are you different? How are you going to bring value, solve problems? But to tell a coherent story somewhere, it really helps to be talking about costs and the total cost of ownership and the margin and the bottom line profitability. If we have folks who are listening that say, ooh, I like shaking hands, I like go grabbing a beer, I like all the sales stuff, but I just don't feel that comfortable with the true language of finance, what might be a small step they can take to get comfortable with this language of finance?
Well, the two things I'd say is, number one, I have heard so often when I've been coaching people, mentoring them, or indeed actually even working with them, people say to me, I just want to do the creative thing, or I just want to do the sales thing, or I just want to look after the people thing. And I go, yeah, that's all very well, but the language of the boardroom, as you say, is finance. The language of business, right at the top, is finance. Unless you speak that language, you're not going to be there. And I think we've all seen so many TV programs and series, those ones where it's whatever happened to. And you find rock stars and artists and things like that who were very successful for a time, but then, of course, they end up drunk or penniless or whatever. And, of course, who's gone off with the money? It's their agents and the people who actually did know how to manage the money. So all I'd say is don't lose control of the money, because you lose control generally. So it's not that hard. With some focus and a sense of confidence and need, you can take yourself on courses. I'm sure you'll have some friends who are finance people, etc. Just get them to sit down with you and explain how a balance sheet and an income statement works. Again, tie in your ideas, your sales ideas, to the impact on the mainstream metrics of any business. Look at the income statement. How is what you're doing impacting the top line of revenue? How is what you're doing, if it's a really clear and well-branded approach and sales approach to clients and customers, if you're using the power of the brand that you've got behind you, that's an efficient way of generating sales, as opposed to constantly having to find new contacts and things all the time. So branding gives you more efficiency, and also having a strong brand and knowing about the finance, that gives you a very reliable long-term bottom line delivery. And, you know, that's a very powerful thing to be on top of.
Yeah, I love your point about the cash flow statement. When in doubt, cash is king. And if you understand they have a lot of cash, you will intuitively know, like in your personal lives, there's lots of ways I can deploy this. I can invest in new things. I can buy companies. We can do all these things. If you do not, or, you know, your prospect does not have a lot of cash flow, well, and I think that's something that often gets overlooked, and maybe just because it's lower in your category of different finance documents. But I think that was you hit the nail on the head there.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's that saying that faith, hope, and charity, and the most powerful of all of these is cash flow. So that's the wonderful sayings about this. But yes, the truth shows up in the cash flow. And so many businesses, they go down not because they haven't got orders and clients and things like that, but they don't have the cash in the bank and they don't have access to enough to keep them going. So cash is absolutely king and queen.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you here, and again, Rita, I appreciate you making time. I'm watching it on my end here. The title of your book, Love Your Imposter, Be Your Best Self, Flaws and All. Allow me to kind of lie back on the couch here for a minute. There are several things that you find yourself in situations where you're saying, why am I here? I'm going to be found out. I'm not prepared. You know, who do they think I am? How many of these people here see through me? And I think in my mind, to a certain degree, I find that motivating, and that can help push us forward and to stay ambitious and to achieve great things. The other side is obviously this can be a terrible, terrible way to live. What advice might you have for people who'd say, either on the surface or deep down, this imposter syndrome, I know exactly what they're talking about. Where's that line between it becoming helpful and becoming some entirely different neuroses? Well,
the first thing I'd say is, if anyone listening in here recognize this thing about imposter syndrome, and the definition of imposter syndrome is, if you look at Harvard Business Review, for example, it's actually feelings of inadequacy despite evident success. And to me, it's that voice on my shoulder saying, you don't deserve to be here. As you were saying, you know, can you do this? This is going to be the time that everything goes pear-shaped and you should step aside for someone who really knows what they're doing. These are such common human feelings. 70% of people say that they experience imposter syndrome. So if you do suffer from it or experience it, you are in very good company. You are talking about Tom Hanks. You're talking about Michelle Obama. You're talking about Emma Watson. You're talking about a whole range of incredibly talented people. Howard Schultz has talked about it too. So actually what's really interesting there is that a lot of people, very high-profile, successful people, have made imposter syndrome work. And I recognized it in myself when I tried to do new and different and bigger jobs. I worried about whether or not I can do it. But actually, I did a lot of work on myself. And I think this is really, really key. I mean, you joked about lying on the sofa, but actually, I think it's important for us to understand ourselves. What is it that drives you? Because when you know what drives you, you can recognize it and you can manage it. So what I say these days to the imposter, I look over my shoulder at my imposter and I go, I know why you're there. You're going to make me work harder, stretch myself, practice more, etc. And that's going to make me better. And as I say, a lot of people have imposter syndrome and they are successful people. Now, clearly, if your imposter syndrome is so intense, and it is for a minority of people, they worry and are anxious so much that it makes them quite debilitated.
Yeah.
You need obviously to get some professional help and to make sure that you can look at your imposter in a more positive way. And the reason why I call the book Love Your Imposter, by the way, is exactly for these reasons, is that you can, if you can do some work on yourself and your drives and things like that, you can use your imposter and go, I'm going to embrace you and the energy and drive you're giving me to make myself improve and better, as opposed to struggling with it or saying I need to overcome my imposter syndrome, etc. That, if you're not careful, can drain your energy. And I remember once I was talking to someone who happened to be a martial arts expert. I mean, I would not know one end of a judo mat from another. But I was talking to this person about the philosophy of Love Your Imposter, and they said, it reminds me of doing judo, which is the way you win at judo. It's not by beating your opponent and sort of getting on top of them and things like that. You use their weight to enable you to win. And I thought that was a fantastic insight. You can use the weight of your imposter feelings to help you succeed and win. And it can be used as a really, really positive drive. And what's more, it's a really human thing. It's more like a human condition as opposed to a syndrome. And it helps you connect with other people, to be empathetic with other people. And frankly, that's what we need in business as well as the broader world at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great place to end, Rita. And again, thank you for your time. Where can people learn more about you, about your book, and anything else?
Well, I have a website, which is www.ritaclifton.com, where there are podcasts and stories and writing and things like that. But my book is called Love Your Imposter, Be Your Best Self, Flaws and All. And that is published by Kogan Page, and you can find it on Amazon and all good bookshops. So I do hope people will enjoy it. It was honestly written, and I hope that it might help other people recognize some of these things in themselves and really use them to their advantage, because we need a lot more good, authentic human beings running organizations and believing that they can.
I couldn't agree more. Myself and my team, we really enjoyed this and kind of did it as an ad hoc book club, but it was very beneficial for everyone on our team. So thank you so much for writing the book. We will include all the details and links in our show notes. And again, thank you so much for making time, Rita. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
As always, thank you for your time and attention. I hope you found this conversation with Rita Clifton to be valuable. Hopefully you took away more than one thing. I surely enjoyed speaking with her. So that's all we got. Our goal here is to make this the best podcast you listen to, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, ideas for future shows or potential guests, or if you're struggling with any sort of leadership situation with your team, I would love to be able to help and discuss it on the show. If you did find this episode valuable, please share it with your network and leave a review. Those mean more to us than you know. So as always, thank you for listening. We're going to close out like we always do with our leadership mantra. You, my friends, are owed nothing. Deliver value first.